Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. I am Karen Utter, and I am the project director for the Carolina Family Engagement Center. And we are a grant project funded by the U.S. Department of Education. And we're located in the offices of the South Carolina School Improvement Council at the University of South Carolina. Tonight, we are really pleased and lucky to have with us three panelists that are going to be talking about attendance tonight and answering your questions. And they're all from the Office of Student Intervention Services. We have Dr. Sabrina Moore, who's the director of the office. We have Yvonne Coleman, who's the education associate, and Regina Thurman, who is the family and community engagement liaison. We'll go ahead and start with the program. If you could, please keep yourself on mute. But we do want you to actively participate through the polls that we'll have. And if you have questions at any time during the course of the session, please feel free to put those in the chat, and those will come to us, and we will, when we get to the appropriate spot, we will go ahead and answer those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sabrina Moore to introduce the State Department and talk about the purpose of today's session.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of State Superintendent of Education, Molly Spearman, we want to welcome you and to thank you for joining us. We also want to thank Karen and the Carolina Family Engagement Center for this opportunity to talk with you, parents, guardians, caretakers, community members, and others about the importance of school attendance. And we also want to answer some of your burning questions, as Karen called it, some of your burning questions. So again, I would just reiterate that if you have any questions, like if you ever wanted to know, please put those questions in the chat and we'll attempt to answer those questions as we move forward this evening. So why are we here? What led us to this place? In October, and it was, I guess, just about a few months after school started, a few superintendents said that some of the students in their respective districts were just not attending school as they should. Some students weren't attending at all, and others were coming every now and then, kind of like that occasional students. But we knew that where the students were not coming at all, or they were coming occasionally, something had to be done, because we know the importance of school attendance for student success. And so we decided at that moment something needed to be done. And we decided in this particular time in January, because we're at the beginning of a new semester, beginning of a new year, but more importantly for these purposes, the beginning of a new semester. And so we knew that if we could come to you as parents and caretakers and guardians now, then it's not too late for all of us to work collaboratively and collectively to get students back on track. So we did. We reached out to Karen and cfec, and we asked, what's a mechanism for us to talk directly to parents and guardians? And this is the result. Now, we know that because of COVID, there are many questions and concerns about attendance. And so what we wanted to do is to kind of create a space, this space, so that we would have an opportunity to share with you information, important information, factual information about school attendance. We would have the opportunity to answer some of your questions and to address some of your concerns, and then to point you to some sources and resources with, again, accurate, current information. So why are we here? Now, we know that with the schools opening and closing and COVID and Omicron and Delta, and we know all of these things are going on, but it's important for us to say that we are not here to debate whether or not students ought to be face-to-face or in a virtual environment. We believe that that is important, but that's not our purpose here tonight. What we at the department do is that we rely on the CDC and we rely on DHEC to establish guidelines for that allow students to attend schools safely. We believe that And we hope that you believe as well that it's not an easy decision for districts to decide whether or not to go face-to-face or virtual. We believe that district superintendents and all of their administrators and educators, we sincerely believe that they make decisions based on what they believe is in the best interest of students and staff in the attempt to make sure that they are safe, that they are healthy, and the learning continues. And so we recognize the concerns around the face-to-face, again, versus virtual, but we want to say whether or not your district, your students, your children are in a district that's face-to-face, in a district that's virtual, in a district that's hybrid, the point is they must be in school. That's the point, that they have to be in school. And so we want to bring to you this evening some laws and regulations and things like that. So I just want to say on behalf of our office, so for Aveen and Regina, I just so appreciate working with you two ladies, because that's where the information, that's where the knowledge is. So again, we want to thank you all very much for attending, for participating. We want to encourage you again to feel free to put your questions in the chat. By the way, I must say we might not be able to get to all of your questions this evening, but I can guarantee you that we are going to do our darndest to make sure that we give you accurate, that we give you concise, and that we give you clear information. We don't promise to know all the answers, but we do promise that we're going to try to provide you with information that is going to set your children up for success. So Karen, thank you again for arranging this venue for us, and we look forward to the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. I forgot to turn my microphone back on. So we're ready to put y'all to work here as we start off on our program. We would like to hear from you in one or two words what the biggest challenge is that you and your child have faced with school attendance this year. Or if you are a parent specialist or a teacher or another type of educator, what's the biggest challenge that you've observed that parents and children have faced with school attendance this year? And again, try and make it in just one or two words or a couple of words, because we're going to create a word cloud out of that. And Julia's our tech guru is going to give you instructions on how to respond.
Thank you, Karen. Well, for those of you who have not seen this technology yet, it's called Slido. And if you are joining from a device where you're able to scan this QR code on the screen, you're welcome to scan that QR code. It will take you immediately to your browser where you'll be able to start typing in your answer. If you're on a device where perhaps you're viewing on the screen itself, and that's what you would typically screen your QR code with, you can simply open a browser. So whether that is like a Google Chrome browser or some other internet browser, and type in this address, slido.com, and then it will prompt you for 6 digits, which you'll see here on the screen are 733249. And I see that some of y'all have already started sharing, so it looks like it's working.
All right, we're getting some responses. Great, thank you. Keep them coming. We'll give it one more minute here. I see a lot of COVID. And Julia, will I be able to see this all on one screen to look at it, or do we have to scroll down?
I will scroll down, Karen. Would you like me to start doing that?
Sure. Well, I just thought we'd take a quick look
Yeah.
to see what's going on. So I think a lot of the challenges are COVID related, certainly constant change, illness, contact exposure letters, quarantine, the varying bus schedules, and I know that's connected to the shortage of staff and teachers, makeup work anxiety, confusion about quarantine requirements, knowing when you need an excuse. Well, it sounds like for many of these cases, you've come to the right place in terms of the information that we're going to provide. And that's very helpful to us in terms of letting us know what's on your mind and the kinds of things that you're facing. Aideen Coleman from the Department of Education is here to make sure that we have the information that we need to keep our kids on track with attendance. So Aideen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen, so much. I want to get started by talking about why attendance is so important. The reason why we discuss why it's so important up front is because we want everybody to understand that we really want kids there because they get better grades when they're actively attending school. They are able to earn their high school diploma because the state has seat time requirements. So when a student is there and actively engaged, they're able to earn that high school diploma. And once they earn that high school diploma, they're able to go on to college opportunities. And then attendance is a major workplace skill. That's one thing that we've heard over and over when we've had meetings with the business folks. People must be in attendance. So we're building that workplace skill for students. As we move forward to the next slide. So what does our federal rules say about attendance? It says that a student must be in attendance 50% of the school day in order to be counted present. In our past, students would used to show up for an hour and everyone thought that was full day attendance. Since 2016, 2017 school year, we made this change to follow the federal guidelines. So your student must be in attendance 50% of the day. And if you ask, where do I get that information from? Usually your attendance clerk will be able to let you know what 50% of the school day is for that school, because it varies based on the school start date. As we move forward to our research, what does our research say about attendance and poor attendance? Usually students who are not attending school, they have lower standardized test scores. Their grade point averages are lower. They have high rates of retention, meaning that they can be retained because they are missing so much time, so much instructional time, that they are not picking up the knowledge to advance to the next grade level. It is also important to understand that it affects reading as well. Students who don't attend usually struggle with reading. If you've ever looked at any research, the Early Graduate Center, everyone graduates, our National Dropout Prevention Center that's housed in Clemson, one of the #1 indicator in the early warning system is attendance. It is one of those predictors to let us know that student may be at risk of dropping out because they've missed so much instructional time. So it is so important that we build that partnership with families and schools to ensure that students are attending. As we move forward, knowledge is power, and understanding the basics of attendance, that's what we want to go through today. So let's get started and talk about some of those laws that are in place that schools follow. So the South Carolina General Assembly passed the basic rules for attendance. Those basic rules are our compulsory attendance law. This law has been around a long time. I will go into detail regarding that law in a little bit. The State Board of Regulation, our state board regs is passed by the State Board of Education. And that regulation for attendance is Regulation 43274. It is our student attendance law. It goes over what an unexcused absence is, what an excused absence is, what is truancy, what is habitual truant, and what is chronic. But these are pertinent laws that families need to be aware of. Also, your local school board and your district and your schools pass additional laws to make sure that they are in compliance with the state's compulsory attendance law and making sure that they're in compliance with the regulation 43274. So when you get a call from the school asking for you to send in that note or to make sure your student is in school, they're looking at that information based on the law. Students are required to be in school. Next slide. So let's talk about the compulsory attendance law. The compulsory attendance law requires a guardian to make sure that a student is in school. And there are many different school options in South Carolina. You have your traditional school, you have your charter school, the virtual school, the private school, and homeschool. But your student must be in school. And we know that we're suffering through the pandemic at this time, but the student must still be enrolled in school. Just a reminder, you just can't take a student out and they don't have a place to go, meaning another school, either that traditional school, transferring to another school, transferring to a charter school or virtual school, maybe even going to a private or being homeschooled. But a student must be in school. And based on the compulsory state law, that student is supposed to be in school from age 5 until their 17th birthday or until they graduate. Our goal is to make sure that students graduate from high school. So it is very important that when you get those calls from the schools, the end goal for every student in the state of South Carolina is to ensure that they graduate from high school with a high school diploma and are on track to go to college or career ready. Next slide. So let's talk about the two different policies that we actually have when we're talking about chronically absent students and truant students. Chronically absent is an actual federal guidelines that state follows. Our states follow that guideline. It looks at students in grades K through 12 who are missing 50% of more of the instructional day and 10% of their enrollment. So what is 10% of the enrollment in South Carolina? In South Carolina, 10% of that enrollment means that all districts operate 180 days, so 10% of that is 18 days. So we're looking at students who miss 10% of that enrollment of 10%, which is 18 days, or the time period in which they're enrolled in that school. So what absences count for that? The excused absences, unexcused, and suspensions. And a lot of times we get questions saying, well, why do excused absences count? Because the student is missing quality instruction. And that's the point. The point of measuring chronic absenteeism is to ensure that students are not missing a lot of instructional time. And that's why we measure chronic absenteeism. Even if they're suspended, they're still missing instruction. So those are why we measure that information for the feds. They want to see how many students are not there who may be struggling because they're not there, and to make sure that schools are able to provide some intervention to get the student back on track. Truancy. Truancy is actually a part of our state regs, which is Regulation 43-274. It is also a part of the compulsory attendance law, and it impacts students from grade ages 6 to 17, and it's unexcused absences only. Unexcused absences only. And to be identified as truant, you have to miss 3 consecutive unexcused absences or a total of 5 unexcused absences. And it's full day. So if your student is at the elementary school, they have to miss the entire day. If your student or your child is at the middle or high school, they have to miss the entire day, all periods, to be considered truant. And that has to be unexcused absences. For truancy, we do not count suspensions. We only count full day unexcused absences. And if you ask a question about, well, if I turned in a parent note and it's unexcused, will it count? If it's an unexcused parent note, then it does count for truancy. So I just wanted to cover that section while we're on truancy. Anything that's unexcused counts for truancy, but it has to be full day absences, and it has to meet the 3 consecutive or a total of 5 unexcused absences. And as we move forward, let's talk about those absences and what does that look like. These are excused absences. These excused absences do require you to submit a note or a medical note in order for it to be excused. The districts do need some form of documentation letting them know that this student was at a doctor's visit or had an emergency, and it's written, and then it can be excused. And excused absences is one of them is when a student is out because they are sick, illness for that student. The other absence, if they have someone sick in the family or death in that family, you still have to turn in a note, but that's an excused absence. If your student is out for a recognized religious holiday, that's also an excused absent. Just make sure you turn in that note. If you have an absent due to an activity, those activities have to be pre-approved by the principal in advance. And in order for that to be excused, you have to contact the school and contact the principal. And they usually like that in writing so that they can approve that actual activity. But that is a school-based decision. So please make sure that if you have something that needs to be excused and it needs the principal approval, that you double check and get that information to the principal or the attendance clerk at that school, and they will definitely get that information over to the principal. What are some of our unexcused absences? Absences of a student without knowledge of his or her parent. And to say that, that means your child has probably been skipping school, you're not aware of it. And that's what we're referring to, meaning that you had no involvement, the child is not attending school. The other one is without acceptable cause and with knowledge of the parent. We do have cases where kids are missing school and the parents are aware of it, and it's not a lawful absent. And those absences are considered unexcused for that purpose. Next slide. So we have another poll here for you. How many students in South Carolina were chronically absent, or at least missed 10% of the days that they were enrolled in school during the 2021 school year? If you could scan that QR code and answer that question.
And for those of you who are just joining us, if you've not used this before, you can either scan the QR code or you can type in that web address and that series of 6 digits, and it will let you chime into this poll.
We're going to give everybody a few more minutes. Did everyone get a chance to answer who wanted to answer? If you could type yes in that chat box. Okay. So the answer is 167,448 students were identified as chronically absent. That means those students missed 10% of their enrollment. And as I mentioned to you before, 10% in South Carolina is 18 days. The sad thing, when we were reviewing this data, some kids missed more than 18 days. Some missed 20, some missed 30. some miss 40 days. So our goal is to make sure that as we move forward, I know that we're in a pandemic and school districts have provided opportunities for students to attend virtually. And when those students are attending virtually and turning in that work and logging on and completing assignments, that does not impact this data as long as the student is actually logging in and turning in the work. This data here looks at students who had unexcused suspensions and excused absences as a whole. So if your student is turning in their work, getting everything done based on the school's deadlines, they are not impacted by this data set. So we had our major concern over last year and this year is that that number is still high. It's still going up. We're still collecting this data. We wanted to give an opportunity for families to understand why it's so important for students to be in school, and also why is it important that you keep track with your students' attendance, because in order for us to be successful as a state and for your student to be successful as well, we believe that students should be in school. If they can't be in school, we want to make sure that we get that makeup work, and to make sure that if they're virtual, that they turn those assignments in. But please inform your schools if your student is not attending for any major reasons, that they are not in school and you're aware of it. It's very important so they can make sure that the students get the proper services when they return. But as you see, we had a huge incline with our numbers based on the year of 1920. That's the year in which we closed. But before the pandemic, we still had students that were chronically absent. Our overall goal is to ensure that students are in school, but if they're sick and not well, we want to make sure that they get back in school when they are, and to make sure that they get the materials and the assignments and the instruction that they need. Next slide. I want to thank you for listening, and I know that you have questions, and we'll gladly answer those questions. Karen?
Thank you, Aveen. And we do want to get started on the questions. I'll start with this one. And do we have Sabrina also? Well, I'll go ahead and get it started here. In high school, if a parent submits a parent note for an illness without a doctor's excuse, is the absence still excused for seat time purposes? Do you want me to read it again? I'll tell you again. In high school, if a parent submits a parent note for an illness without a doctor's excuse, is the absence still excused for seat time purposes?
That depends on your district. Most districts have a limit on parent notes. They do accept parent notes for certain illnesses that kids may not go to the doctor for, like running a fever, vomiting, things like that. But districts do have a limit on parent notes. So I would refer you back to the student handbook to make sure you check to see how many parent notes are allowed in my district.
All right. So next question. What happens if my child is placed on quarantine? Is that automatically an excused absence?
If the school has placed your child on quarantine, that is an excused absent. In most cases, the district, if your child is still well enough to attend or is asymptomatic, the school district will assign them either an educational packet or they will assign them virtual instruction during that time. And that may be that they log into Google Classroom and review that assignment and then turn in the work. And then your student would be counted present. But please make sure that you're going through your school. If the school did not send you in quarantine and your child is ill with COVID, please make sure you contact the school so that they can start those proper procedures to get your child into that virtual learning or that educational packet so they can be very successful during that time, or provide additional makeup work when they return.
Karen, here's a question. As a follow-up, Aveen, that if the entire school is quarantined or out, what should our students do? If they don't do the work, we're just not sure. They say, what should we do?
When the entire school is quarantined, usually the school district provides work. And it is very important that your child does that work because that counts as their attendance. And if they don't do the work, they will have a lot of work to make up, but those absences could be counted as unexcused because the school district has moved the entire instruction into virtual. And they usually give parents instructions that the students need to log in every day, or they need to check Google Classroom to get the assignments because everyone in the school is virtual. So it's just like you're face-to-face, but you're in a virtual environment. So you have to submit the assignments in order to be counted present. And if you don't, it's absent because everybody's virtual at that point. And that's the new attendance procedures. Once every person in that school is in the virtual environment, you have to submit the work or log in. Please check your school policy though, to make sure, because when they actually put the whole school on virtual, they do send out instructions by email. It's posted on the district's website and also posted on the school website. So please make sure you're following those procedures.
So if, for example, my child tells me that let's say my child's on quarantine, she says, "Oh, Mom, they didn't give me any work to do. I don't have any work I need to do." I need to probably make a phone call, or I need to reach out to the school and find out, because they're not just sending children home for quarantine without any instruction, correct?
Correct. They should reach out to the school, also reach out to the teacher, but usually that information is posted in Google Classroom. They definitely are not sending them home without any instruction if the whole school is quarantined. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to the next question. Is there, and actually we had a question, this question was pre-submitted electronically. We had a parent who asked if there was a deadline for submitting documentation to show that their child was absent, or their child's absence was excused.
Yes, there is a.
If I come back in a month or two, or at the end of the semester, I look and I see my child's got a whole bunch of unexcused absences, can I go back to the doctor and get those excuses and submit those? Do they have to take them?
Usually their districts have policies and it's different for every school district. So I ask that you go look at your school handbook. They usually have a policy that states how long you have in order to turn in that note. that excused parent note or that medical note or any note that will cause that absence to be excused. And if it's turned in too late, sometimes it's not accepted because they usually ask parents to try to turn those notes in within that time frame.
Okay.
And it varies from one school district to another, but it averages between 3 to 5 days. But you have to look directly at your school policy. Very important.
And Karen, it seems like the theme here is that, and Regina's shaking her head because we've had these conversations. The theme here is that there are rules and regulations, as we've seen from the federal level, from the state level, and then just state board regulations. But school districts are pretty much required to give all students a handbook. And so within that handbook, attendance policies and procedures and that kind of information is there. So we do want to encourage parents to arm yourselves with the information that you need in terms of what do I do, you know, so that student handbook is critically important. I know as a parent, sometimes we just sign it and say, I read it and send it back so the student can get their credit. But there's a lot of information in the student handbook that we encourage all of us as parents to take advantage of.
And if I can just add to that, in the same vein, that school-home relationship matters. You want to have a great connection with your child's school, a great relationship, so that, as we said earlier, knowledge is power, and knowing what's in the handbook, a lot of times they're going to refer you back to that. So it's important.
And Regina, I think in connection with that, thinking about the family school partnership, and that this is really a partnership of, and that your school, if you've got a challenge that whether it's related to COVID or it's related to transportation or it's related to some other circumstance in your life, if you're having, you know, difficulty with attendance and facing a challenge, there may be someone at your school that can help. If you go, you may go first to the attendance clerk, but that person, if you can express to that person or to someone else at the school what it is that what your challenge is, hopefully that, you know, to continue to ask until you get referred to someone that could help. And Aveen, I don't know if you want to speak to that or not.
Yes, if Karen, you're correct. They can actually, that attendance clerk will probably refer them to the guidance counselor. They may refer them to the social worker that's at the school that works with attendance and referral-based services. But there's someone at the school that's there to help you. Their main goal is to make sure your child is in school and being successful. So they want to do as much as they can on their part to get your student back in school, back attending, and to refer you to services. Sometimes it's not always at the school level where services take place, but they will definitely connect you with the guidance counselor or social worker.
And this question is sort of related to, I think, that question of the shared partnership or the working together. Is my school supposed to notify me when my child is absent?
Yes, your school is supposed to notify you. Sometimes we don't always get those messages, but they do. Most school districts use the phone service to notify parents that their child has been absent. Some districts use text, some districts use email, but we always refer to parent portal. If you don't have parent portal, please check with your district so that you can get access to parent portal. You can have your students' information daily. You can see which period they missed before the school even calls you. So it is very important that you reach out to the school if you don't have access to parent portal and get that extra tool It is an app that you can add to your phone, or you can log in with the computer to get that information, but the schools will reach out. Sometimes parents don't always get the message, but they do their best to send those automated calls to let you know that your child has been absent for the day, and they do need that excuse turned in.
Gotcha.
I also think too that this is another, good example of shared partnerships, shared responsibility between home and school.
Yep. All right. Next question. We had a question. This is another pre-submitted question. How can I repair my child's attendance record quickly?
The quickest way to repair your child's attendance record is once your child has missed school, that you turn in that excuse. Once you turn in that excuse, the attendance clerk will update that attendance. But if they don't have a written excuse to update that attendance, it's hard for them to get that done. So the major thing is to get that excuse in when your child is returning back to school.
And Aline and Karen, I do think another perhaps perspective on that question is, and this is why we are here in January at the beginning of a new semester, and we talked about chronically absent students, that if your child has already missed 8, 9+ days, okay, get the excuses. If you've forgotten to turn in excuses, get the excuses. But remember, for chronically absent, it doesn't matter if it's excused or unexcused. So how do you get your child back on track? Make sure the child is in school, okay? Make sure your student is either in school sitting at that desk every day. If it's virtual, make sure your student is logging in every day. If it's some students, because we recognize, and I think that was another issue that came up earlier, we recognize that there are sometimes some technology issues that students have. And you want to inform the teacher as soon as you possibly can. If your student has a packet of information, make sure that student completes that packet of information. That's how you get your student back on track to make sure they're in school.
All right. Next question. This is a question again about, I think about quarantine. So if my child is on quarantine and doesn't turn in their work on 3 consecutive days, does that mean that they're considered truant?
If they're on quarantine, meaning just the individual student being on quarantine, for that student will have an excused absent. If that's the individual student being on quarantine, they will have to make up 3 days worth of work when they return back to school and learn new materials. That's why it's so important that if the district assigns your student the work while they're on quarantine, and if they are able to complete that work, that they complete that work, and then they are not marked as absent. But if they are an individual student being assigned to quarantine, it's an excused absent. But when your whole entire school district goes virtual, that means that their mode of instruction now is virtual, and they are going to take attendance just like you were face-to-face, whether you show up or whether you submit the assignment.
All right. So we'll turn a little bit to a little bit different question. My child is on a traveling sports team, and so they travel periodically for games and such. Is that considered an excused absence when they have to travel during school time?
That is something that you have to reach out to the school district for, because they may offer that child a virtual setting. So you really need to contact the school because that's something that has to be approved. That's not an automatic excused absent. That's something that has to be approved, and the school district can probably find a better plan for your student. So you would have to reach out directly to the school because that's very school specific.
Okay, so that sounds like it's like one of those events that you have to check to see whether that's an event that the school considers to be an excused absence or not.
Yeah, that's one of those advanced approvals by the principal. And they may have a set limit in their school policy. So we would want you to actually contact the school principal to get that in and provide that documentation.
Okay. Okay. So we've got about, let's see, about 7 minutes left. We're going to do a quick poll, but during that time, if you have any last minute questions or questions that have come up as a result of this discussion, please put those in the chat so that we can get to those before we close. So our final poll of the night: have schools relaxed attendance rules during the COVID pandemic? Yes or no? Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to respond. We do have another question that came in, so I want to make sure we have time to answer that as well. So, Aveen, what's the correct answer?
Well, the correct answer is that schools should be making sure your students are in attendance every day. The only thing that they have made adjustments for is to ensure that students received instruction during their quarantine period, either through educational packets as materials or through virtual learning with Google Classroom. But they still must ensure that your student is attending every day if they're well enough to do so.
All right. So I'm going to slip in this last question here that came in the chat. So, and this is coming from the school perspective, what is the best way for a school to contact a family about chronic absenteeism?
Well, usually our schools already have some procedures that they can notify them. Usually school districts use a range. They can contact them by letter, phone call, email, to schedule a meeting just to have a discussion, to see what's going on, to see if that student needs additional support services. That's the best place to schedule what we call an intervention meeting on the Truancy on the truancy side, this would be an intervention meeting as well to provide some additional strategies to support that student in getting back in the school and attending every day.
And Regina, did you have anything you wanted to add on that in terms of, you know, how we go about when we're having conversations with families about chronic absenteeism?
I would like to emphasize the importance again of the partnership between home and school and keeping the lines of communication open. As we always say, communication is a two-way street, and together is more powerful so that you can be proactive instead of being reactive.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've gotten through the questions. And so, but if for some reason, or if additional questions pop up in your mind, which questions are always popping up in my mind, but if you still have questions or new questions come up during the course of this semester, where to take those questions. First, the school attendance clerk is someone that is going to be at every school. And as I think Aveen mentioned earlier, that person may be able to direct you to additional folks that can help if there's a specific challenge or issue that's going on that's really making it difficult for your child to attend school regularly. At the district level, it's the attendance supervisor. You can also look to your school's handbook, as we've mentioned before. That school's handbook is the place where you're going to find everything, including those rules that maybe are established specifically for your school. And so you want to look at that. And then there's a website that's available that has, at the School Board Association, they have school policies online. So you can look and find your district and find your district's policies there and take a look at those if you're having trouble finding them elsewhere. So I just wanted to give one last opportunity to the panel. Is there any specific thought or message that you'd like to leave with folks as we wrap up today?
I do see where we have a raised hand. I don't know if this person is able to type their message in the chat, or have they done that as we close out?
Hi, I did type my message, but I think it went to the speaker only, Ms. Coleman. I do have a quick question. My question is, what about excused absence when there's a threat at the school?
Usually that is a school district decision, and I would need more information to actually answer that question, because usually the principal usually provides a little more detail. And if you could send that information on later, we can definitely address that, because it's very specific that you have a concern. And I'll type my email in for you to send that to me. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And then we had one last question. Will this presentation or recording be shared via email? I don't think it'll be shared via email, but we will have a link to it on, I know, on our website, and that's cfec.sc.gov. Or you can email me, and I'll put my email in the chat so that everyone can see it. It's utter@email.sc.edu. And if you have any further questions or would like to get a copy of the slides, or if you'd like to find out how to re-review this recording, we'd be happy to help you with that.
Karen,
So,
I added my email.
oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll be very happy to help you with that. So with that, and unless Aveen or Sabrina, or Regina, do you have anything further? All right, well, we're at 7:02, so I'm gonna wrap it up, but we hope this was helpful. We thank you so much for taking the time to find out more about attendance. And again, please, the CFEC, we're here to help with locating this kind of information. So please feel free to contact me at that email address if you need additional information, and we'll do our best to direct you in the right direction.